Dust motes danced in the shaft of morning light, hitting the empty velvet slot on her dresser. A platinum band, slightly scuffed from 3 years of washing dishes and scrubbing floors, was gone. Her husband claimed he took it to be polished. He lied. He sold it to buy a diamond pendant for a 23-year-old receptionist. He thought he was playing a tired, predictable game with a naive, financially dependent housewife. He didn't know the woman he married was the sole heir to a ruthless financial empire. Pale morning light filtered through the cheap Venetian blinds of the bedroom, casting harsh horizontal stripes across the rumpled duvet. Nora sat on the edge of the mattress, her thumb rubbing rhythmically over the base of her left ring finger. There was a distinct indentation there, a ring of slightly paler skin, smooth and compressed, where the platinum band had sat undisturbed for over 1,000 days. She pressed her thumbnail into the pale flesh until a sharp prick of pain bloomed, testing to see if she could still feel it. She could. From the kitchen, the sounds of Liam making breakfast filtered down the narrow hallway. The aggressive scrape of a metal spoon against a ceramic bowl. The hiss of the cheap coffee maker they had bought on clearance at a big box store. The mundane domestic symphony of a life Nora had desperately wanted, a life she had traded her inheritance to secure. She stood up. The hardwood floor, warped near the radiator, creaked under her bare feet. She walked to the small cherry wood dresser, a flea market find Liam had sanded down and refinished for their first anniversary. Her jewelry box sat open. The velvet slot in the center was completely empty. Nora didn't scream. She didn't dissolve into a puddle of tears on the floor. Instead, a heavy, leaden sensation pooled in her lower abdomen, cold and nauseating. She walked into the kitchen. The smell of burnt toast and peppermint toothpaste hit her nostrils. Liam was standing by the counter, scrolling through his phone with one hand and haphazardly buttering toast with the other. He wore his gray slacks and a crisp white shirt. The collar was slightly frayed at the edges. "Morning, babe," he said, not looking up from the screen. His voice was smooth, carrying that easy charm that had completely disarmed her 4 years ago when he spilled lukewarm coffee on her coat in a downtown bodega. "My ring is gone, Liam." Her voice sounded hollow, detached. Liam stopped chewing. His thumb hovered over his phone screen. For a fraction of a second, his shoulders went completely rigid. It was a microscopic tightening, a subtle brace for impact, but Nora caught it. Then he relaxed, turning to her with a perfectly constructed look of mild confusion, followed instantly by sheepish realization. "Oh, right! God, I'm an idiot!" he laughed, a nervous, breathy sound. He set the toast down and wiped his hands on a dish towel. "I took it yesterday while you were in the shower. I dropped it off at that jeweler on 4th Street. The prongs on the diamond were looking a little loose, and our anniversary is coming up next month. I wanted to get it tightened and polished. A surprise." He walked over and kissed her forehead. His lips felt hot against her cold skin. He smelled of his usual drugstore aftershave, but beneath it there was a faint, sickly sweet undertone. Artificial vanilla, sandalwood. It wasn't her perfume. She used a subtle, sharp citrus scent. "You took it while I was in the shower," Nora repeated. The words tasted like ash. "I wanted it to be a surprise, Nora," he said, his tone shifting just slightly, adopting the gentle, patronizing edge of a man explaining something simple to a child. "Don't look at me like that. You'll get it back by Friday, good as new." Nora nodded slowly. Okay. She watched him grab his briefcase, kiss the air near her cheek, and walk out the door. The deadbolt clicked into place. The silence of the apartment rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. Nora walked over to the small laundry closet tucked beside the bathroom. Yesterday evening, while Liam was supposedly at a late team-building dinner, she had gathered his discarded clothes. His jeans from the weekend were balled up in the wicker hamper. She reached in, pulled them out, and plunged her hand into the front right pocket. Her fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of stiff paper. She pulled it out, flattening it against the lid of the washing machine. It was a small, rectangular ticket, bright, obnoxious yellow. The ink was a faded dot matrix purple. Gold and Silver Exchange, 118th Street. Item: Platinum Solitaire, 1.2 carat center stone. Minor band scuffing. Payout: 3,500 dikorboards. She stared at the numbers. $3,500. The ring was worth 10 times that. She knew because she had secretly wired the jeweler the difference when Liam bought it, allowing him to think he had aggressively negotiated a massive discount to afford something beautiful on his junior accountant's salary. She had wanted him to feel proud. She had wanted to protect his fragile ego. Now, he had sold it for pennies. Nora gripped the edge of the washing machine. Her knuckles turned white. A violent shudder ripped through her chest, a physical rejection of the reality standing right in front of her. She didn't want to be the cynical, calculating woman her father raised. She wanted to believe the man who made her burnt toast, but the yellow ticket was rough against her fingertips, grounding her in the miserable truth. He didn't just lose it. He didn't just break it. He calculated its worth, placed it on a glass counter, and traded the symbol of their marriage for cash. The subway ride to 118th Street was a sensory assault. The humid air trapped in the underground tunnels smelled of ozone, hot brake dust, and stale urine. Nora sat stiffly on the orange plastic seat, the yellow pawn ticket tucked securely into the breast pocket of her denim jacket. She watched the flickering lights of the tunnel wall streak by, her reflection superimposed over the grime of the window. She looked tired. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy knot, and there were faint purple shadows beneath her eyes. When she surfaced onto the street, the midday heat hit her like a wet towel. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to the quiet, tree-lined street she and Liam lived on. Here, pawn shops shared walls with neon-lit liquor stores and cash-checking fronts. A bell jingled aggressively as she pushed open the heavy glass door of the Gold and Silver Exchange. The interior was dim, illuminated by humming fluorescent tubes that cast a greenish pallor over everything. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and the sharp metallic tang of tarnished silver. Behind a thick pane of scratched plexiglass, a heavy-set man with a receding hairline sat on a stool, watching a portable television. Nora walked to the counter. She didn't speak. She simply reached into her pocket, slid the yellow ticket through the small gap at the bottom of the plexiglass, and waited. The man slowly dragged his eyes away from the screen. He picked up the ticket, squinted at it, and then looked up at Nora. His gaze was entirely devoid of empathy. To him, she was just another desperate face in a city full of them. A woman trying to buy back a piece of her life. "Tickets from yesterday," he grunted, his voice sounding like boots crunching on gravel. "Guy who brought it in signed away the buyback rights for an extra $100. It's store inventory now." Nora's stomach contracted. Liam hadn't even pawned it as a loan. He had sold it outright. A clean break. "I want to buy it," Nora said. Her voice was steady, surprising her. The man shrugged. He turned around, unlocked a safe against the back wall, and pulled out a small black velvet tray. He carried it back to the counter and slid it toward the plexiglass. There it was, sitting between a chunky gold chain and a cheap digital watch, her ring. The single diamond caught the awful fluorescent light, throwing fractured rainbows across the scratched counter. $5,000, the man said, leaning his elbows on the counter. Cash. Nora looked at him. "You paid him $3,500 yesterday." "Yeah, and today it's a retail item. Supply and demand, sweetheart. You want it or not?" Nora reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She opened an application she hadn't touched since the day she moved out of the penthouse on the Upper East Side. It required a retinal scan, a thumbprint, and a 12-digit alphanumeric code. The screen glowed, displaying an offshore account balance that had accumulated quiet, staggering interest over the last 4 years. 9 figures. She transferred $5,000 to a digital wallet, tapped her phone against the shop's ancient card reader, and waited for the beep. The man raised an eyebrow as the receipt printed. He didn't ask questions. He just slid the ring under the glass. Nora picked it up. The metal was cold. It felt foreign now, tainted by the transaction, stripped of the love it was supposed to represent. She didn't slide it back onto her finger. Instead, she unclasped the thin silver chain she wore around her neck, threaded the ring onto it, and let it drop beneath the collar of her shirt. It settled against her breastbone, a heavy, freezing secret. When Liam came home that evening, the apartment smelled of roasting garlic and chicken. Nora stood at the stove, mechanically stirring a pot of risotto. She listened to the sound of his keys in the lock, the thud of his briefcase hitting the floor, the rustle of his coat being hung in the closet. "Something smells amazing," he said, walking into the kitchen. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pressing his face into her neck. Nora went entirely still. The nausea rushed up her throat, sour and hot. The smell was stronger today. It wasn't just on his skin. It was baked into the fabric of his shirt. Cheap vanilla, sandalwood, and beneath it, the faint, unmistakable scent of hotel soap. "How was work?" she asked, her voice dangerously flat. "Brutal," Liam sighed, stepping back to loosen his tie. "Johnson is breathing down my neck about the quarterly audits. I didn't even get to take a lunch break. Just stared at spreadsheets until my eyes bled." He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, completely at ease. Nora turned to look at him. She looked at the slight redness around his mouth, the way his hair was perfectly tousled in a way that required a mirror. She looked at his hands, the hands that had unbuckled a stranger's belt in the middle of a Tuesday workday. "Did you talk to the jeweler?" she asked, stirring the rice. Liam didn't miss a beat. "Yeah, called them on my commute home. They said they're a little backed up, but it'll definitely be ready by next Friday. I told them to take their time and do it right." He smiled at her, a bright, affectionate, devastatingly convincing smile. Beneath her shirt, the platinum ring pressed into her skin like a block of ice. Nora forced the corners of her mouth upward into a fragile imitation of a smile. "Good," she said softly. "I can't wait to see it. By Thursday afternoon, the oppressive summer heat had settled over the city like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The asphalt radiated warmth, distorting the air above the streets in shimmering waves. Nora sat at a small, circular table in the window of a dingy cafe directly across the street from Liam's office building. An untouched, lukewarm espresso sat in front of her, the surface coated in a bitter, oily film. The cafe smelled of burnt coffee grounds and old pastry dough. She had been sitting there for 2 hours. Her phone lay face down on the table. At 4:45 p.m., the revolving doors of the glass-fronted office building across the street began to spit out exhausted corporate workers. Nora's eyes tracked every gray suit, every navy blazer. At 4:52 p.m. he walked out. Liam wasn't alone. He was walking close, too close, to a young woman. The proximity wasn't explicitly romantic, but it carried an undeniable intimacy. Their shoulders brushed. They leaned their heads inward to hear each other over the roar of the traffic. Nora's breath hitched in her throat, catching sharply. She studied the woman. She was young, maybe 22 or 23. She had glossy dark hair that bounced as she walked, wearing sharp, expensive-looking heels that clicked rhythmically against the concrete. She was wearing a tailored white silk blouse, the top 2 buttons undone to combat the heat. And resting against her collarbone, catching the late afternoon sun, was a diamond tennis necklace. It was delicate, shimmering with small, brilliant-cut stones. It was the kind of necklace a junior accountant couldn't afford on a whim. It was the kind of necklace that cost exactly $3,500 at a mid-tier department store. Nora watched as Liam stopped at the corner. He glanced around casually, a quick practice scan of the street. Finding the coast clear, he reached out and tucked a stray strand of the girl's dark hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. The girl smiled, looking up at him with naked adoration, and touched the diamond necklace at her throat. Nora didn't feel rage. She didn't feel the sudden, explosive urge to run across the street, scream at him, and rip the necklace from the girl's throat. Instead, her vision tunneled. A high-pitched ringing started in her ears, drowning out the honking cabs and the rumble of a passing delivery truck. The air in the cafe suddenly felt entirely depleted of oxygen. She stood up abruptly, knocking the small wooden chair backward. It clattered against the tile floor, drawing a dirty look from the barista, but Nora didn't notice. She stumbled out of the cafe and into the thick wall of heat on the street. She made it halfway down the block before she had to turn sharply into a narrow alleyway. The stench of rotting garbage and damp brick hit her face. Nora braced her hand against the rough, grimy wall, bent forward, and dry heaved. Her stomach violently rejected nothing, her muscles cramping painfully. She gasped for air, the smell of the alley burning her nose. She closed her eyes, and all she could see was Liam's hand gently touching that girl's jaw. All she could see was the sparkle of diamonds bought with her discarded devotion. She had given up everything for him. She had turned her back on her father's empire, refusing a life where love was a transaction and trust was a liability. She had wanted something real. She had wanted to be just Nora. But as she wiped her mouth with the back of her trembling hand and stood up in the filthy alley, a terrifying realization settled over her. The softness she had cultivated over the last 4 years was gone, burned away in a matter of seconds. In its place, an old, familiar coldness seeped into her bones. the Gallagher coldness, the ruthless clinical detachment her father used to dismantle rival companies and ruin men without blinking an eye. Nora walked the 10 blocks back to her apartment. The walk felt entirely automated. She didn't feel her feet hitting the pavement. When she let herself into the quiet, dim apartment, she didn't turn on the lights. She walked past the cheap sofa with the fraying upholstery. She walked past the framed photograph of their wedding day sitting on the bookshelf. She went straight to her closet, pulled a dusty shoebox from the top shelf, and opened it. Inside, beneath old tax returns and a faded passport, lay a sleek black burner phone. She hadn't charged it in 4 years, but she knew the battery would still hold. She plugged it into the wall outlet. The screen immediately lit up with a low battery icon. Nora sat cross-legged on the floor, waiting. 10 minutes later, the phone powered on. There was only one contact saved in the device. RG. Her hand hovered over the call button. If she pressed this, there was no going back. Her father didn't do half measures. He didn't forgive, and he certainly didn't understand the concept of a quiet divorce. If Richard Gallagher entered the fray, Liam's life would be atomized. His career, his finances, his reputation, everything would be ground into dust. Nora touched the bump beneath her shirt, where her wedding ring rested against her chest. She thought of the yellow pawn ticket. She thought of the smell of sandalwood. She pressed the green button and raised the phone to her ear. The line rang twice. The sound was sharp and digital in the quiet room. On the third ring, the line clicked open. There was no greeting, just the quiet sound of a man breathing, waiting for the caller to speak. "Hello, Dad," Nora said. Her voice was unrecognizable to her own ears. It was smooth, devoid of any tremor, sharp as cut glass. Silence stretched on the other end for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the tiny speaker. "I told you you'd be back, Nora." Nora stared at the peeling wallpaper of her cheap apartment. "You were right." "What happened?" her father asked. His tone wasn't concerned. It was strictly business, assessing the damage. "My husband made a miscalculation," Nora said, the words falling from her lips like stones. "He thought I was a liability. He thought I was weak." "And?" Richard prompted, the faint scratch of a fountain pen on paper audible in the background. "And," Nora breathed in, the coldness fully taking root in her chest, locking away the girl who used to make burnt toast and laugh in cheap diners. "I want him ruined, Dad. I don't want a divorce. I want an eviction notice on his entire life. I want him to have absolutely nothing left." Richard Gallagher let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated through the phone. "Give me his name, sweetheart, and I'll give you his head on a platter by Tuesday." Monday morning arrived with the dull, oppressive heat of late July. The air conditioner in the bedroom rattled, fighting a losing battle against the humidity pressing against the window panes. Nora stood by the closet, watching Liam knot his tie in the mirrored door. It was a navy silk tie with faint silver stripes. She had bought it for him for his last promotion. He hummed a tuneless melody under his breath, completely absorbed in the reflection of his own face. He pinched his cheeks lightly to bring color to them, smoothed down his eyebrows, and shot himself a quick, approving wink. It was a private moment of vanity Nora had witnessed 100 times before. Today, it made her stomach turn over, heavy and sour, "You're quiet this morning," Liam noted, meeting her eyes in the mirror. He smiled, a practiced curving of the lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still thinking about that ring? I told you, babe. Friday. It's gonna look incredible." Nora leaned against the door frame. The wood was cool against her shoulder. "I'm just tired. Didn't sleep well." "You need to get out of the apartment," he said, turning around and shrugging on his suit jacket. He patted his pockets, checking for his keys and wallet. "Go see a movie. Buy yourself a coffee. Here." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $20 bill, extending it toward her with the casual benevolence of a man tipping a valet. Nora stared at the green paper. The edges were sharp. George Washington's face looked indifferent. A bizarre, hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat, thick and choking, but she swallowed it down. She reached out and took the bill. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was warm. "Thanks," she said, her voice a hollow rasp. "Have a good day, sweetheart," Liam said, kissing her cheek. The faint scent of artificial vanilla and hotel soap clung to his collar. He didn't wait for a response. The front door opened and shut. The deadbolt clicked. Nora stood in the hallway for a long time, the $20 bill crumpled in her fist. Her chest felt tight, constricted by a brutal, conflicting ache. Part of her, the part that had spent 3 years building a life in this cramped, drafty apartment, wanted to run after him. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to beg him to dismantle the lie so they could put the pieces back together. She wanted to be wrong, but beneath her cotton t-shirt, the heavy platinum ring rested against her breastbone, freezing cold. She walked to the kitchen and dropped the $20 bill into the garbage disposal. Then she picked up her burner phone and sent a single text message to her father. "I'm out. Burn it down." The offices of Sterling and Hayes Accounting occupied the 14th floor of a mediocre glass high-rise in Midtown. It was a mid-tier firm, populated by men who wore suits that were slightly too baggy and drank coffee that tasted like burnt copper. Liam stepped off the elevator at 8:45 a.m., holding a cardboard cup from the corner bodega, feeling entirely untouchable. He walked past the reception desk. Chloe was there. She wore a pale pink blouse today, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek clip. The diamond necklace was tucked beneath her collar, but Liam knew it was there. He caught her eye and gave a subtle, downward nod. A secret acknowledgement. Chloe blushed, looking down at her keyboard, a soft smile playing on her lips. Liam felt a surge of adrenaline, a warm, intoxicating rush of power. He was a junior accountant, but he felt like a kingmaker. He had a wife at home who thought he hung the moon, and a beautiful young woman at work who looked at him like he was a god. Life was a game of careful navigation, and he was winning. He dropped his briefcase on his desk, woke up his computer, and took a sip of his coffee. The acrid taste of cheap beans washed over his tongue. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the atmosphere on the 14th floor violently shifted. The main glass doors at the front of the office didn't just open, they were held open. 6 men and 2 women walked in. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that instantly silenced the low hum of office chatter. They didn't wear off-the-rack navy blazers. They wore bespoke charcoal wool and carried black leather briefcases that cost more than Liam's annual lease. Leading the pack was a tall, severe woman with iron gray hair cut into a sharp bob. She bypassed reception entirely, ignoring Chloe's panicked, squeaking protests, and walked directly toward the glass-walled office of Arthur Johnson, the firm's managing partner. Liam stood up slowly from his cubicle, his coffee cup hovering halfway to his mouth. A prickle of cold unease crawled up his spine. Through the glass walls of the corner office, Liam watched as Johnson stood up, his face immediately draining of color. The gray-haired woman handed Johnson a thick manila folder. Johnson opened it, read the first page, and practically collapsed back into his leather chair. 10 minutes later, the firm's intranet crashed. Liam's monitor flickered, then went completely black. A harsh white text box appeared in the center of the screen. Network locked. Administrative audit in progress. Panic rippled through the cubicles. Keyboards clattered aggressively as people tried to reboot their systems. Telephones began to ring, a cacophony of shrill, electronic shrieks that went entirely unanswered. "What the hell is going on?" muttered Greg, the senior analyst in the cubicle next to Liam. Greg was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a crumpled tissue. "It isn't answering. The servers are totally locked." Liam swallowed hard. The sour taste of the bodega coffee churned in his stomach. "It's probably just a routine compliance check. Relax." But Liam wasn't relaxed. The men in charcoal suits were systematically fanning out across the floor. They weren't speaking to the employees. They were carrying heavy black plastic crates and moving directly to the physical filing cabinets. One of the men, a broad-shouldered man with a perfectly shaved head, stopped at Liam's desk. "Liam Davis?" the man asked. His voice was completely flat, devoid of any inflection. "Yes," Liam said, straightening his posture, trying to project a confidence he suddenly didn't feel. "Step away from the desk. Leave your mobile device on the keyboard." "Excuse me?" Liam barked, a defensive anger masking his rising terror. "You can't just come in here and—" "Mr. Davis," the man interrupted, leaning forward just an inch. The faint smell of expensive mint and ozone drifted off him. "As of 8 a.m. this morning, Sterling & Hayes was acquired through a hostile debt buyout by Gallagher Holdings. Your employment is currently suspended pending a full forensic audit of your personal and professional accounts. Leave the phone. Step away from the desk." Liam's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Gallagher Holdings. It was a name whispered in corporate circles with a mixture of reverence and absolute dread. They didn't buy mid-tier accounting firms. They bought sovereign debt and tech conglomerates. Why the hell were they here? He dropped his cell phone onto the desk. It clattered against the plastic casing of his keyboard. "Follow me to conference room B," the man instructed. Liam walked down the narrow, carpeted aisle. The synthetic fibers of the carpet seemed to grab at the soles of his shoes, making his legs feel heavy and uncoordinated. He glanced toward reception as he passed. Chloe was standing behind her desk, chewing aggressively on her thumbnail. She looked at Liam, her eyes wide with fear, and then she quickly looked away, physically stepping back from the desk as if proximity to him might infect her. The small, cynical realization hit Liam like a physical blow. She isn't going to wait for me. Conference room B was a windowless, glass-enclosed box in the center of the floor. The air conditioning in this specific room was always set 10 degrees too low. Liam sat in a rigid mesh chair, shivering uncontrollably. He had been sitting there for 3 hours. No one had brought him water. No one had spoken to him. He could see his co-workers moving rapidly beyond the frosted middle stripe of the glass walls, packing up boxes, speaking in hushed, terrified whispers. His mind raced, flipping frantically through every ledger he had touched, every expense report he had padded. He was a minor player. He occasionally expensed a nice dinner, maybe blurred the lines on a cab fare. Nothing that warranted a forensic audit from a predatory multinational conglomerate. It didn't make sense. The door handle clicked. Liam jumped, his knee cracking loudly against the underside of the mahogany table. Arthur Johnson, his boss, walked in first. The man looked 10 years older than he had that morning. His tie was loosened, his collar stained with a ring of yellowish sweat. Following him was the gray-haired woman who had led the invasion. And then, stepping quietly through the door, was a third person. Liam blinked. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing like a trapped hornet. His brain simply refused to process the visual information being sent through his optic nerves. It was Nora. But it wasn't the Nora who stood in his cramped kitchen smelling of dish soap and old cotton. This woman wore a flawlessly tailored midnight blue Alexander McQueen suit. The fabric drank the light. Her blonde hair, usually pulled into a messy domestic knot, was blown out sleek and straight, falling like liquid glass over her shoulders. She wore black stiletto heels that clicked against the linoleum with the sharp, rhythmic cadence of an executioner's drum. Her face was terrifyingly blank. The soft, accommodating warmth he had relied on for 4 years was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, architectural stillness. "Nora," Liam whispered. His voice cracked, sounding small and pathetic in the cold room. What are you doing here? Did they call you? Are we being sued?" Nora didn't look at him. She didn't even acknowledge his voice. She pulled out the leather executive chair at the head of the table, the chair Arthur Johnson usually occupied, and sat down. She folded her hands on the mahogany surface. Her nails were painted a sheer, glossy nude. Johnson remained standing. He looked at Liam, his expression contorted with a mixture of rage, disbelief, and abject terror. "Mr. Davis," the gray-haired woman began, opening a thick binder and sliding it across the table toward Liam. "My name is Helen Vance, Chief Legal Counsel for Gallagher Holdings. The woman sitting at the head of this table is Eleanor Gallagher, Chief Operations Officer and primary stakeholder of Gallagher Acquisitions." Liam stared at Helen. Then he stared at Nora. The name hung in the freezing air. Eleanor Gallagher. "That's a mistake," Liam stammered, a desperate wet laugh forcing its way out of his throat. "Her name is Nora Davis. She's a freelance copywriter. She's my wife." "She is Eleanor Nora Gallagher," Helen corrected smoothly, tapping a manicured fingernail against the binder. "And as of this morning, she is the owner of this firm, the owner of the building this firm operates in, and the primary holder of every single line of credit attached to your social security number." The blood drained out of Liam's head so fast he felt dizzy. A roaring sound started in his ears, like standing too close to the ocean. He looked at Nora. She was finally looking at him. Her eyes, usually a soft, warm hazel, looked like polished stones. There was no pity in them, no anger, just an insectoid observation of his crumbling reality. "Nora," he croaked, gripping the edge of the table to keep his hands from shaking. "I don't understand." Nora finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, pitched an octave lower than he was used to. It didn't tremble. "Open the binder, Liam." His fingers were clumsy and numb. He fumbled with the cardboard cover, flipping it back. The first page was a high-resolution color photograph. It was taken from across the street of a cafe. It showed Liam standing on the sidewalk, his hand gently resting on Chloe's jawline. The young receptionist was looking up at him, the diamond necklace sparkling at her throat. Liam felt the bile rise in his throat, hot and acidic. The smell of the room, the stale sweat, the dry erase markers, the sterile air conditioning, suddenly made him violently nauseous. He frantically flipped the page. It was a bank statement, his personal, hidden checking account, the one he thought she didn't know about. Every transaction was highlighted in bright yellow ink. Hotel rooms, expensive lunches, a charge for $3,500 at a mid-tier department store jewelry counter. He flipped the page again. It was a legal document, a notice of termination from Sterling and Hayes, citing gross misconduct and embezzlement. "Embezzlement?" Liam choked out, looking wildly at Johnson. "Arthur, I didn't embezzle anything. This is insane. A few padded Uber receipts doesn't equal embezzlement." Johnson looked away, swallowing hard, unable to meet Liam's eyes. "Upon acquiring the firm's ledgers this morning," Nora said, her tone conversational but laced with absolute poison, "we discovered a significant discrepancy in the quarterly tax withholdings for 3 of your primary accounts. $400,000 rerouted into a shell company." "I didn't do that!" Liam screamed, slamming his hands onto the table. The acoustic tiles in the ceiling seemed to absorb the sound instantly, deadening his panic. "You know I didn't do that. I don't even have the security clearance to move that kind of money." "The digital footprint says otherwise," Helen Vance stated dryly. "We found the IP logs matching your desktop terminal. The shell company is registered under your mother's maiden name in Delaware. The evidence is entirely conclusive." Liam's jaw dropped. The terrifying, crushing realization crashed down on him. They hadn't just caught him cheating. They were framing him. They were building a meticulously documented, airtight cage of financial ruin, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. He looked at Nora, the woman who baked him chicken and folded his laundry, the woman whose inheritance he had unknowingly weaponized against himself. "You're framing me," he whispered, a tear of pure terror leaking out of the corner of his eye and tracking through the cold sweat on his cheek. "Why? Why go this far? Just divorce me. Take the apartment. I'll sign whatever you want." Nora stood up. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the front of her jacket. "Because a divorce implies an equitable dissolution of a partnership, Liam," she said softly. "You didn't treat our marriage like a partnership. You treated it like a resource to be mined. You assumed I was stupid. You assumed I was weak. You sold my wedding ring for $3,500 to buy a trinket for a receptionist who, by the way, just signed an affidavit claiming you harassed her into a relationship under threat of termination." Liam gasped, the air completely knocked out of his lungs. Chloe had betrayed him. The second the men in suits arrived, she had recognized the sinking ship and kicked him overboard to save herself. "The police are waiting in the lobby, Mr. Davis," Helen Vance said, closing the binder with a sharp, definitive snap. "They have a warrant for your arrest on federal fraud charges. Your personal bank accounts have been frozen pending an investigation. The lease on your apartment was held by a subsidiary of Gallagher Holdings. Your eviction notice was served an hour ago. Nora walked around the table. As she passed him, the scent of her perfume hit him. It wasn't the soft, domestic smell he was used to. It was sharp, expensive, and totally cold. "Don't worry about the ring, by the way," Nora murmured, pausing just behind his chair. She leaned down, her lips inches from his ear. "I got it back." The journey from the police precinct back to the apartment felt like a hallucinatory nightmare. Liam had spent 12 hours in a holding cell that smelled of vomit and industrial floor cleaner. He had been released on a massive bail bond. An anonymous payment he suspected was orchestrated by Nora just to prolong the psychological torture. His suit was hopelessly wrinkled. His tie was gone, confiscated by the booking officer. His shoelaces dragged on the concrete sidewalk. It was past midnight when he finally stumbled up the steps of his apartment building. His keycard had been deactivated. He had to wait 20 minutes for an elderly neighbor to enter the lobby, slipping in behind her like a stray dog. He rode the elevator up to the 4th floor in complete silence. The mechanical hum of the cables sounded like a countdown. He walked down the hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, casting long, sickly shadows. He reached his door, apartment 4B. The door was unlocked. It hung open about 2 inches, a black vertical slit in the beige hallway. Liam pushed it open. The hinges squeaked, a high, desperate sound. The apartment was entirely hollowed out. The shock of it made him stumble backward. It wasn't just that the furniture was gone. The place had been surgically stripped of life. The framed photos were gone. The curtains had been ripped from the rods. The cheap cherry wood dresser he had refinished was missing. Even the light bulbs in the ceiling fixtures had been unscrewed and removed. The only illumination came from the harsh yellow streetlights outside, casting elongated, distorted shadows across the warped, hardwood floor. The air smelled strongly of industrial bleach and raw cardboard, the scent of roasting garlic, of Nora's citrus perfume, of the life they had shared. It had all been violently scrubbed away. In the center of the empty living room, sitting on a folding metal chair, was Nora. She was still wearing the dark blue designer suit, though the jacket was unbuttoned. She sat perfectly still in the gloom, her silhouette sharp and unfamiliar. "Nora," Liam breathed, his voice cracking violently. He took a step forward, his shoes scuffing loudly against the bare floorboards. He fell to his knees. The wood was hard and unforgiving beneath his joints. He crawled toward her, the last shreds of his pride evaporating into the bleached air. "Nora, please," he sobbed, the tears flowing freely now, hot and shameful. "Please, I'm sorry. I'm so stupid. I'm so sorry. They took everything. They froze my accounts. The police. I'm going to go to jail, Nora. Please, you have to tell them the truth. Tell them I didn't steal that money." Nora didn't move. She watched him crawl toward her with the detached curiosity of someone observing an insect trapped under a glass. "You sold it," she said. Her voice was flat, echoing strangely in the empty room. Liam stopped crawling. He looked up at her, his face slick with tears and sweat. "What?" Nora reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small rectangular piece of paper. The harsh yellow street lamp light caught the obnoxious, faded color. A yellow pawn ticket. She let it drop from her fingers. It fluttered in the stagnant air, drifting down to land on the floorboards right in front of Liam's knees. "Gold and Silver Exchange, 118th Street. Item: Platinum solitaire, 1.2 carat center stone, minor band scuffing. Payout, $3,500. Liam stared at the purple dot matrix ink. A physical wave of nausea slammed into him. The lie was exposed, laid bare under the harsh light of his total ruin. He couldn't spin this. He couldn't charm his way out of a printed receipt. I needed the money, he stammered, a desperate, pathetic lie spilling out before he could stop it. We had bills, Nora. I was trying to protect you. Nora laughed. It was a short, dry, ugly sound that scraped against the walls of the empty room. You bought a diamond necklace for a 23-year-old girl who didn't even hesitate to throw you to the wolves the second her own job was threatened, Nora said, leaning forward. You traded a woman who would have lived in this drafty, miserable box with you forever for a girl who liked the shine of your fake success. She reached up to the collar of her silk blouse. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled a thin silver chain from beneath the fabric. Dangling at the end of the chain was the platinum ring. The 1.2 carat diamond caught the ambient streetlight, flashing with a brilliant, freezing fire. Liam stared at the ring. It looked incredibly small, resting against her sternum, yet it carried the weight of an anvil. It was the physical manifestation of his greed, his stupidity, his absolute miscalculation of the woman he had married. I bought it back, Nora said softly, her fingers tracing the cold metal of the band. It cost me $5,000, a small price to pay for absolute clarity. Nora, please, Liam begged, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the hem of her trousers. I love you. I made a mistake. It was just a mistake. I didn't know who you were. Nora stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Liam's hand fell back to the wood. That's the tragedy of it, Liam, she said, looking down at him. The coldness in her voice was total, absolute. You didn't need to know my bank account to know who I was. I was the woman making your toast. I was the woman washing your clothes. I was the woman who loved you. She walked past him, her stiletto heels echoing like gunshots in the empty room. She stopped at the open doorway. You have until 6 a.m. to vacate the premises, Nora said, without looking back. The demolition crew arrives at 7. They're turning this building into luxury condos. She walked out into the hallway. The door didn't close behind her. Liam remained on his knees in the center of the dark, bleached room. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the yellow pawn ticket. The paper felt rough and cheap against his skin. He held it tightly, the only thing he had left in the world, as the sound of Nora's footsteps faded away into the suffocating silence of his ruined life. Footsteps echoed sharply against the damp pavement as Nora walked out of the building for the final time. The muggy, suffocating heat of the New York night immediately wrapped around her, smelling of hot asphalt, exhaust fumes, and the faint, sweet decay of overflowing corner trash cans. It was 3:15 a.m. The city was in its deepest, most vulnerable state of sleep, but the avenue was far from quiet. A distant siren wailed, a thin, panicked sound that bounced off the brick facades. A black stretch, Maybach idled at the curb. Its engine purred with a low, subaudible vibration that she felt in her chest before she actually heard it. The rear passenger door swung open. A heavy-set driver in a dark suit offered a subtle nod, his eyes fixed on the pavement, giving her absolute privacy. Nora climbed inside. The heavy door closed with a muffled, airtight thud, instantly severing her from the noise of the street. The interior of the car was a different universe. It smelled of aged Connolly leather, ozone from the hyper-filtered air conditioning, and the sharp, unmistakable bite of expensive bergamot. Sitting in the far corner of the expansive back seat, half swallowed by the shadows, was Richard Gallagher. He didn't look at her as she settled into the seat across from him. He was methodically pouring a dark amber liquid from a crystal decanter into two heavy low-ball glasses. The ice clinked, a crisp musical sound that felt obscenely loud in the insulated cabin. "Did he cry?" Richard asked. His voice was a gravelly baritone, entirely devoid of malice. It was a simple data collection. Nora unbuttoned the tailored jacket of her suit. The stiff, expensive fabric suddenly felt like a straitjacket restricting her lungs. She looked out the tinted window. Liam's building was already receding as the car glided away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the empty avenue. "Yes," Nora said. The word tasted like ash on her tongue. Richard held out a glass. Nora took it. The crystal was heavy and freezing against her warm palm. She brought it to her lips and swallowed a mouthful of the Macallan. It burned beautifully, a fiery, peaty streak down her throat that temporarily incinerated the knot of nausea sitting in her stomach. "Good," Richard murmured, taking a slow sip of his own drink. Men who trade loyalty for a cheap ego boost only understand one language: consequences. You can't reason with them, Eleanor. You can only remove their foundation and watch gravity do the rest. Nora leaned her head back against the leather headrest. She closed her eyes. She expected to feel victorious. For the last 48 hours, she had run on pure, high-octane adrenaline. She had meticulously orchestrated the complete and total annihilation of a man's life. She had stripped Liam of his career, his reputation, his home, and his freedom, all with the surgical precision of a drone strike. But sitting in the chilled air of the Maybach, the adrenaline finally crashed. What was left behind wasn't triumph. It was a vast, echoing hollowness. She felt like a scooped-out melon. She looked down at her left hand, resting on her knee. The pale indentation on her ring finger was still there. The skin was slowly plumping back up, erasing the physical evidence that she had been married, but the ghost of the band still tightly constricted her knuckle. "I miss him," she whispered into the dark cabin. It was the most terrifying, pathetic truth she could muster. Richard didn't flinch. He didn't mock her. He just swirled the ice in his glass. "You don't miss him," her father corrected softly, his tone carrying a rare, abrasive gentleness. "You miss the man you invented. You miss the version of him that existed in your head, the one who ate burnt toast and didn't care about money. That man died the moment he walked into that pawn shop. Maybe he never existed at all." Nora opened her eyes. The streetlights flickered across the tinted glass in rhythmic, hypnotic flashes of yellow and orange. He was right. That was the most devastating part of the entire ordeal. She didn't hate Liam for cheating. People cheated. People were weak. She hated Liam because he had forced her to wake up. He had forced her to take off the comfortable, fuzzy sweater of her fake middle-class life and put on the iron armor she had spent her entire youth trying to escape. She had wanted to be Nora, just Nora, the girl who bought generic coffee and worried about the electric bill. but she was Eleanor Gallagher. And Eleanor Gallagher ruined people who crossed her. She was her father's daughter, right down to the marrow. Liam had just provided the necessary catalyst to prove it. She reached up to her collarbone. Her fingers found the thin silver chain. She pulled it over her head, the platinum ring dragging heavily against her skin. She held it up in the dim light of the cabin. The 1.2-carat diamond caught the passing glow of a street lamp, flashing with a brilliant, freezing fire. $3,500. A cheap price for an education in human frailty. Without a word, Nora leaned forward and dropped the chain and the ring into the center console's empty crystal ashtray. It landed with a dull, heavy, metallic clatter. She wouldn't pawn it. She wouldn't throw it in the river. She would leave it there, a discarded piece of trash in the back of a luxury car, exactly where it belonged. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice finally losing its tremor, settling into a cold, flat register. "The penthouse," Richard said, staring out his own window at the towering, indifferent skyscrapers of Manhattan. "You have a board meeting at 9. It's time you took your seat, Eleanor." Nora took another slow, deliberate sip of her scotch. The burn was completely gone now. She didn't feel the heat. She didn't feel much of anything at all. "Draw up the divorce papers," she said, looking straight ahead at the partition separating them from the driver. "And have Helen send a bottle of champagne to the receptionist. Chloe, she earned it." The Maybach swallowed the miles, carrying her away from the wreckage of her own heart, deep into the cold, glittering heart of the empire she would now rule. If you felt the absolute chill of that final realization, you know that true heartbreak isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, crushing moment you realize you can never go back to who you used to be. Nora traded her innocence for a crown she never wanted to wear. And Liam learned that betrayal carries a price tag he could never afford. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button to show some love. Share this video with someone who appreciates a cold, calculated, and perfectly executed revenge. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. We have plenty more stories of broken trust, hidden empires, and the brutal consequences of underestimating the quiet ones coming your way.